Hey, buddy, I plugged the toilet here. Yeah, I'm sorry, man. We're out of fiber in my diet. Yeah, no. Yeah, that's that big turd there.
Corn.
Hey my fellow friends, it's Chris from Shughead Gaming, bringing you what is likely my divisive review for Hitman 3, developed and published by IO Interactive and releasing exclusively in VR for the PlayStation VR January 20th, 2021. Hitman 3 retails for approximately $60 for the standard edition and $85 for the deluxe edition that gets you additional contracts, suits, and items, as well as access to the director commentary, soundtrack, and the World of Hitman book. Hitman on PSVR was reviewed on a PS4 Pro and the PS5. Hitman 3 closes out a much-loved trilogy of Hitman titles and does so with ambition and finesse, bringing not only Hitman 3, but 1 and 2 all into glorious virtual reality, providing of course you own the first two. Live inside these games as you live out every spy fantasy in one of the most robust virtual reality experiences ever made. Coming out exclusively for the aging but still very capable PSVR, stay with me while I run this game and the first two entries through their paces and see if IO has delivered. As always guys, if you like this video, please hit that like button. It not only helps out my channel, but VR gaming as a whole. And if you'd like to see more VR content from me, please consider subscribing. And for video updates, make sure you hit that bell icon. Alright, let's talk graphics. Given that Hitman 3 in VR is exclusive to the PSVR, at least for the time being, I think it's safe to assume that Sony ponied up a fair sum of money to make this VR conversion possible. And it seems fitting that Sony kicked off the PSVR almost 4 years ago with a similar effort in the much-loved Resident Evil 7 VR port. Hence, bookending what is likely Sony's last big contribution to this generation of PlayStation VR. Playable on the PS5 but still running via PS4 backwards compatibility, Hitman 3, like Resident Evil 7 before it, defies what many think is possible on the PS4 hardware when it comes to VR, and delivers an impressive but flawed visual experience. Looking at Hitman 3 on the PS4 in its flat presentation sees the third game in the series looking very much like the previous two, with maybe some improved lighting effects being the most apparent upgrade. With that statement means we get the Hitman staples of large, diverse crowds, average character models, and some above-average weapon models, which, of course, we get to scrutinize and admire up close like never before. Being a port of a brand new game that is additionally launching with a PS5 version, a graphical downgrade from the flat version was inevitable. However, I am pleased to report that this is very much the same game, with much of the game's textures and details making it over to VR. The resolution here, of course, takes a sizable hit, NPC population density is a little lower, and the lighting effects turn substantially down, but where the game loses in these areas, it gains much more with the increased immersion of not only being in VR, but finally being able to play a Hitman game from a first-person perspective, complete with full-body avatar. Many times the game's scale and scope in VR are remarkable, and its world's incredible to simply walk around in, exploring each detail while you map out every access point, hiding spot, and escape route. And these are not often small levels and can be deceptively large with some incredible level design and verticality that really inspire you to explore. Unfortunately, while Hitman 3 in VR can be an incredible experience with production values and graphical prowess rivaling most games currently on the PSVR, it at times can be very apparent that the PS4 hardware, even when running through the PS5, is being pushed to its breaking point, and unfortunately at times beyond it. Hitman 3 is certainly at its best when the action is indoors and NPC population is at a minimum. For despite some texture detail popping in here and there, the PS4 manages to keep things together, and, well, rather impressively so. Levels like the Chinese streets push things a little further, with increased scale and draw distance coming at the expense of increased texture detail pop-in, but benefits from sparsely populated streets, lower light, and enough twists, turns, and indoor sections to maintain a certain level of polish that impresses much more than it doesn't. Unfortunately, Hitman 3 does at times stretch its legs a bit too far for the PSVR, with long, wide-open areas and grand indoor locations filled with people, an aspect the Hitman series has always been famous for. And it is here where the PS4 hardware just can't keep up, as entire groups of NPCs suddenly pop in, at times populating entire areas I thought were previously vacant, making the game simply look janky and unpolished. Texture pop-in also got substantially worse, with entire pieces of geometry sometimes popping in. Larger draw distances also see a massive drop in texture detail, while NPC animations seem to at times drop frames and stutter, like the PS4 simply ran out of resources, a problem that was not rectified running on the PS5. Frame rate issues, although to a much lesser degree, even on the more compact levels, seem to often just hold a steady frame rate that I suspect even then is at the lower end of what Sony will allow for the PSVR. The result was NPCs and at times the environment itself often suffering from a ghosting effect when being viewed while turning, an effect much more obvious on the game's more ambitious stages that even on the smaller levels left a game that simply never felt silky smooth on either the PS4 Pro or the PS5. However, despite these technical shortcomings, Hitman 3 still manages to often impress in VR, and ensures that the game's graphical shortcomings rarely directly affect critical gameplay elements. And while PSVR owners are likely to be blown away by the sheer scope of this game in VR, one's final impressions will likely be determined by their ability to overlook the game's technical shortcomings. Sound is up next.
But I like listening to the radio. Our Royal Highness has never complained about it before.
I'm sorry, but Mr. Ingram, who is the Royal Highness's guest, has requested no noise of any kind.
Okay, but it means I'll work slower.
I don't care. What, dude? Tomorrow?
Yeah.
Work.
It will
Why?
Just wondered if you got the briefing on the lockdown drill tomorrow.
I got it. I'll get issued one tomorrow morning.
You know I think I'm in love, because I don't.
It's easy. Two of us are stationed up here and below, by the card.
Huh?
We get an alert, we both
I need
wait
help!
for cards. Bingo. Lockdown.
What if the other guard is using that?
Well, it's
Whoa! Watch your six!
Oh,
We've
shit!
got contact! That stings! Ah! Oh, fuck! I've got an officer down!
Much like the visuals, the sound side of things here in Hitman 1, 2, and 3 all sound much the same, which is absolutely fine with me, as the series has always been very competent on the sound side of things. David Bateson returns to voice Agent 47, and as usual nails the role that he created almost 20 years ago. Voice work throughout is also top-notch, and when combined with the appropriately epic and dynamic symphonic score, perfectly creates a soundscape that any of the Bond movies would have been proud of. Gun sounds across all weapons are fun and punchy, making them fun to use, even when you really shouldn't. Another area the series has previously excelled in is its overall sound mix, ensuring that as a stealth game first, you always know where enemies are, how many of them there are, and as is very often the case with me, where they're shooting you from. Here in VR, we get the best version of all three games' sound mixes as they are delivered in what appear to be true 3D audio mixes, bringing a level of immersion and accuracy to the series like never before. All in all, Hitman 3 carries on the tradition of quality from previous titles, and again delivers a soundscape that, well, maybe not the best of the best, certainly is AAA, and one of the best that we've ever heard on the PSVR. And that brings us to gameplay. Alright, so Hitman 3 is the 8th main installment in the Hitman series and the final installment of the World of Assassination trilogy. And while it is mind-blowing that we get to play Hitman 3 in VR, you can now also play Hitman 1 and 2 in their entirety, DLC and all, in VR, providing you purchase the previous titles, of course, and are able to navigate the most confusing import process of previous titles to a current title that I have ever seen since probably Rock Band 4. Thankfully, though, the port to PSVR has brought a parity across all three games that not only spans the game's visuals and sound, but also the controls themselves, meaning my comments here relate to all three games in the series. So with that out of the way, I found my time playing Hitman on the PSVR to be a roller coaster of thoughts and feelings, as Hitman in VR is incredible, and yet filled with enough stupid gameplay and control decisions that I often found playing the games to be a chore. So for those who Hitman 3 might be your first foray into the series, imagine if you will that you took the stealth, reconnaissance, and deliberate nature of Metal Gear Solid's gameplay and mixed it with the style and class of the Bond series. Here you are Agent 47, who is, spoiler alert, Hitman. Each game in the series offers up around 6 levels that are essentially giant playgrounds for which you are dropped into and given a set of specific objectives. Often these come in the flavor of assassinations, but can also include collecting intel, objects, or making contact with someone on the inside. Personally, I've always found the series to be a little robotic in its gameplay and a little slow for my taste, but the draw for most to the series is the open-ended nature to how you accomplish said objectives. With a slight sense of humor, Hitman 3, like the games before it, never gets too serious and as such revels in offering up a creative suite of options to play with. Stealth and disguises are certainly the prominent gameplay mechanics here, as they are often required to get you into areas you aren't supposed to be in. Firefights are always an option, but the game certainly rewards those who explore their options and exercise patience and restraint, all qualities that I lack. A bullet to the head is often my solution to, well, everything, but if you can think of a way to accomplish a task, chances are that you can. And while you might think the 6 levels found in Hitman 3's base game is a little on the low side, the levels are often so dense and filled with nuance that replaying missions is half the fun. A point the series has continued to double down on, offering up plenty of incentives to return, including higher difficulty levels, unlockable gear to improve your starting loadout, new starting points, the ability to smuggle in items, and most importantly, new assassination contracts. And of course, providing you add in content from Hitman 1 and 2, you can now easily be looking at upwards of 20 levels, arguably enough to keep you occupied until the PSVR 2. Hitman 3 deviates very little from the first two and often feels more like really good DLC, so if you enjoyed the previous entries, expect more of the same, including the extremely hit or miss AI. Of course, what has changed here is the jump to VR, bringing with it a level of immersion that needs to be played to believe, but a control scheme that simply just pissed me off. Following the trend we all too often see, again, we have a AAA developer creating VR magic with their budget and talent pool, but seemingly designing a VR game without any input from real VR gamers. Opting to not use the Move controllers, a choice which I actually fully support after playing action titles that have attempted similar full movement gameplay. I assumed Hitman would play more like Resident Evil 7, which puts melee and gun aiming to head tracking, while using the DS4 to handle the rest. Head aiming isn't the most ideal way to play, but it worked. Unlike Hitman 3, that has opted to use the DS4 like a tracked boomerang with analog sticks. Using a combination of the DS4's gyros and camera tracking, melee weapons and hand-to-hand combat is all tracked to the DS4, requiring you to remove a hand to swing and punch with the controller. This is admittedly more successful for using the tie wire, as it feels legit, requiring a quick snap of speed to properly execute it. However, gun control is handled much in the same way, requiring you to use the DS4's movement to actually aim the gun. And while I can understand what they were going for here, it was really immersion breaking and, well, totally broken due to the camera attempting to track a flat light on the DS4 versus the three-dimensional tracking capability of the balls used on the move and aim controllers. It works when aiming straight ahead, but turn your body a bit and it all goes to crap, which required me to regularly shake the controller to reset the tracking, a point that was frustratingly driven home by one of the most aggressive chaperone systems I have ever seen in a VR title, popping up every single time I turned my head more than 45 degrees, crouched more than 6 inches, or really moved at all. Doing so not only resulted in the grid from hell, but my head often being detached from my body and controller tracking going to complete shit. Needless to say, seated play was extremely difficult as the chaperone or guardian, whatever you want to call it, is constantly up and unable to be turned off. Some players have had more luck with a lower angle on the camera, but it remains very finicky and essentially, for me, broken. Now again, I totally understand what IO was attempting here, trying to have the best of both worlds with the immersion of a track controller like the Move, but with the analog stick controls. And while it certainly is playable, it made for an extremely frustrating gameplay session that often turned into a janky aiming mess while being shot at, all the while watching my separated body attempt to shoot, while the Guardian reminded me all the while that I wasn't following the rules. In addition, a white circle below your chest represents your inventory dump and was consistently being activated as I moved my controller around. The good news is, this could all be patched, and with a simple option to remove the Guardian, lock the body to the head, and give the option to use the more traditional combat controls, and this all goes away. Sure, we lose the ability to do a few things by hand, but it really didn't work in the first place. Dumbass controls aside, this really is the full Hitman experience in VR, and despite the removal of the ability to hang off ledges, pretty much every stealth and combat mechanic from the flat versions of the series are present. As previously mentioned, Hitman VR is played standing. You can play it seated, but chances are you won't want to. A moderate amount of room is recommended here though for flailing arms, even though the nanny Guardian tells you not to. People with VR sickness issues, I recommend you proceed here with caution. As I previously mentioned, these are certainly not the smoothest VR experiences. Optional click turning and blinders should help, but I recommend you play something else until you get your VR legs. And finally, that brings me to fun factor in my final review. Hitman 1, 2, and of course 3 on the PSVR are likely to be divisive amongst VR gamers. The technical accomplishment of bringing all 3 games onto the PSVR is an incredible achievement that again reminds me of what is possible on the PSVR when some time and money is spent. These are in many ways brilliant ports that, while impressive on the PSVR, also highlight some of its glaring shortcomings in 2021. Visually, this pushes the PS4 right to its breaking point, resulting in an often visually impressive port that at times has a really tough time delivering on the game's more ambitious levels, making a case on its own for Sony to get a new VR headset to the PS5 sooner than later. And here in Hitman VR, the PSVR's lack of analog sticks on its motion controllers has never hurt more, as IO struggles to find a middle ground between the moves and the DS4. The resulting game for me was often filled with awe and fun, but with equal parts frustration and disappointment. As you guys may know, I hate numbered review scores and instead rate games on a scale of buy it, burn it, or wait on it, as well as some information on who this might appeal to more. This is a tough one, guys, but this is a wait for a sale, or at least until they patch the controls and the chaperone system. I honestly feel the same way here as I did with Cyberpunk, where the game could be so good that I almost didn't want to play it until the developer fixed some of the larger issues. If you just can't wait to play this, I totally get that, but I would recommend that you at least hold off on buying 1 and 2, providing you haven't already, at least until you judge the controls for yourself on Hitman 3. Anyways, guys, that's it for me. Thanks for stopping by, and if you like this video, please hit that like button, and if you'd like to see more VR content from me, please consider subscribing, guys. I'll catch you on my next video.